are past the time, I accordingly call this meeting to order and start with the acknowledgement that in Ottawa, we meet on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin people, and all of us have land acknowledgements in our various places. In my case, it would be Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Chinantan First Nations. Pursuant to the order of reference from the House of April 19th, 2021, and the motion adopted on February 25th, 2021, the committee is commencing its study of Bill, well, it's actually been underway for some time, the study of Bill C-15, an act respecting the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, and to make related and consequential amendments to other acts. I will clarify that members that the cited motion has the effect of merging our previous subject matter study with this new one under the order of reference. To ensure an orderly meeting, best practices include selecting language of choice. Bottom of your screen is the globe. Touching the globe, you'll find English, French, or Floor. Select the language that you prefer. If you're changing language as you speak, there's no need to change. The technology hopefully will pick that up. When speaking, make sure your video is on and speak slowly and clearly. Pursuant to the motion adopted on March 9th, 2021, I inform the committee that everyone has completed a technical pre-test. With us today is the Minister of Crown Indigenous Relations, the Honorable Carolyn Bennett. Minister David Lametti was to join us today. He has been unavoidably detained. His submission will be delivered by Minister Bennett. Minister Bennett is accompanied by Ross Patty, the Assistant Deputy Minister, Marla Israel, the Director General, and Laurie Sargent. So, the Assistant Deputy Minister, thank you all. Minister Bennett, would you please begin with your statement?
Before you go, Chair, point of order, just for quick discussion, if we could. Minister Lametti, his appearance was quite important, given that he's a sponsor of the bill. Is there an opportunity to bring him back before this committee before we do clause by clause?
That would be my hope, but I put that to the clerk. How are we in terms of the ability to do that, Mr. Clerk?
If the committee were to decide, then I'd endeavor to make it happen. Our next meeting is clause by clause on Thursday, but I see no reason why the minister couldn't also attend. But it would be slightly irregular, given that for clause by clause, witnesses don't normally make opening statements and are available to answer questions about the bill. But it definitely wouldn't be impossible, and the committee can choose to proceed how it sees fit.
Mr. Schmale?
I'd like to move a motion to call the Justice Minister to the committee at his earliest convenience before we do clause by clause if possible. So potentially that could mean before Thursday. We have a few more days. I don't know the availability of the room, but I'd like to see him appear before clause by clause.
I see hands, Mr. Anandasangri.
Yeah, Mr. Chair. I first of all, apologies to the committee. I know Mr. Lametti was scheduled to be here. Regrettably, something's come up that's completely unavoidable, and therefore he's not able to join us. I do worry about the timeline, and I think Minister Bennett has had co-carriage of this file from the outset, and I think she will be well positioned, as well as a number of officials who have been working on this issue for many years to go through this committee and to outline the issues around C-15 that members may have. Having said that, I think if the minister is available before the scheduled time for the clause by clause on Thursday, we can try to get him here. But I don't believe that it's prudent for us to wait because the number of witnesses we have today are ably able to address any issues that the committee may have.
Mr. Batiste?
I think my intervention was going to be along the same lines as Gary, and but I would like to get to line by line on Thursday, and I'm not in favor of extending it any further because we want to get to royal assent, and we don't want any more stalling or from what Indigenous people have waited far too long to get.
Mr. Schmale?
Thank you, Chair. I think Mr. Vidal was just before me, but I'm happy to hear Miss Bennett, and then we can discuss in the second hour future.
Mr. Vidal, did you have your hand up?
I did, Mr. Chair. Thank you. With all due respect to the witnesses, I'm sure they're very capable and very knowledgeable, but at the end of the day, this is the minister's bill. This is the minister that has spoken on this bill in the House on a number of occasions. It is the minister that has defended the timeframes and the invoking of closure on this, and I think it's imperative that we hear the minister before committee speak to this legislation. I would support Mr. Schmale's motion on having the minister appear before we do clause by clause.
So let me suggest then, as has been stated, that we go through the meeting today and then determine whether we need more information. Ms. Gazan, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Chair. I mean, it's highly disappointing that Minister Lametti is not here today. I think it brings a whole level of unnecessary discussion when we don't have much time to waste. I would be happy with a written submission from the minister in advance of next committee that we can review and submit questions to the minister independently and move towards clause by Thursday.
Okay, so having said that, Mr. Schmale, would you agree to put off the discussion on the motion until after we've heard witnesses today, and then before the end of the meeting, make a decision on your motion?
Yeah, we can talk about it in the second hour. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, so with that, thanks everyone. Minister Bennett, you have 6 minutes and maybe a little more because I understand you're going to do Mr. Lametti's written submission. So welcome and please go ahead.
Thanks so much. And I will read Minister Lametti's opening remarks and then I will move on to mine, Mr. Chair. So I think that will take a little bit more time, but I think it's really important that you hear what Minister Lametti had prepared to say to all of you. Bonjour. These remarks. Bonjour.
I'm very happy to have had the opportunity to speak today before the Committee on Bill C-15, an act respecting the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples.
You from the Department of Justice, which sits on the traditional territory of the Algonquin people.
However, before beginning to speak to the main elements of the bill, I would like to salute the relentless work that has been done unrelentingly by parliamentarians and Indigenous leaders to advance the implementation of the Declaration in Canada. In particular, I would like to point out the work that was done by my former colleague, Romeo Saganash, who brought in Bill C-262 in a previous session of Parliament, and it was studied in detail. We will have to work hard, very hard. And have a committed, sustained commitment on the part of Parliament, the government, Indigenous peoples, and all Canadians to be able to bring about the vision of self-determination and self-government and harmonious relations between the peoples that fall under the Declaration. This is what Bill C-15 brings us together to do. Bill C-15 is based on the fundamental elements of the former bill, C262, which was drawn up in consultation and cooperation with the First Nations, the Inuit, and the Métis.
Recognizes inherent rights and the right to recognition, observance, and enforcement of treaties, agreements, and other constructive arrangements. It also recognizes the role of the Declaration as having application in Canadian law, as a source for interpreting Canadian law, including the Constitution. This is consistent with Canadian jurisprudence, which recognizes that constitutionally, protected rights are not frozen in time. They are part of a living tree that grows and adapts to its surrounding context, including the development of new international norms, such as the Declaration. The legislation includes provisions emphasizing that measures to implement the Declaration cannot be used to undermine Aboriginal and treaty rights that are already constitutionally protected. To be clear, this provision does not seek to reinterpret or amend the rights in the Declaration itself. It only confirms that this legislation cannot be used to derogate from the constitutional protection of Section 35 rights, including treaty rights. The legislation creates three specific obligations on the Government of Canada. The first requires the federal government to take all measures necessary to ensure that the laws of Canada are consistent with the Declaration in consultation and cooperation with Indigenous peoples. The second obligation requires developing an action plan in consultation and cooperation with Indigenous peoples. The action plan would address injustices and combat prejudice while promoting mutual respect and understanding with an underpinning in human rights. The third obligation contained in Bill C-15 is a requirement to prepare annual reports in consultation and cooperation with Indigenous peoples. This would provide transparency on the measures taken to ensure the laws of Canada are consistent with the Declaration and the action plan. I find it
To be able to follow this route, we will have to work in collaboration to determine the way in which the rights and standards set out in the Declaration will be put into practice. This includes the principal elements of the Declaration, like pre-consent and
is a manifestation of the right to self-determination. It is about providing the opportunity for clear, effective, and meaningful participation of Indigenous peoples in decisions that directly affect them. Achieving consent should be the goal of any good faith consultation or collaboration process. To be clear, the Declaration does not confer a veto or require unanimity in these types of decisions. If consent cannot be secured, the facts and law applicable to the specific circumstances will determine the path forward. Bill C-15 will not change Canada's existing duty to consult Indigenous groups or other consultation and participation requirements set out in legislation like the Impact Assessment Act. What it would do is encourage ongoing work to build on these types of arrangements and approaches. I would like to acknowledge that we have heard several potential proposed amendments and want to assure members that we are taking these suggestions very seriously and we welcome your recommendations.
Bill C-15 bears witness to a real, true commitment to promoting reconciliation and to improving relations with Indigenous peoples. In doing this, we will build a better Canada for all generations, the current generations, future generations of Indigenous peoples, and all Canadians. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, do you want me to go on with my remarks?
Yes, please,
Okay.
please go ahead.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, merci. Je m'adresse à vous.
I'm speaking to you from the First Nations territory of the Mississauga Ready And I want to pay homage to those who have walked before me in their moccasins. It's a pleasure for me to appear before this committee to discuss Bill C-15. And I am accompanied today by Ross Patty, Assistant Deputy Minister, Implementation Sector, and Marla Israel, Director General. I would like to take this opportunity to recognize the leadership of the former Member of Parliament, Romeo Saganash, and all the work that he has done to bring about the declaration, and also the establishment of a legislative framework to implement it in Canada. I thank him for his bill that he brought in, which is fundamental to this bill.
Indigenous peoples across Canada, including those Indigenous leaders who participated directly in its development. The declaration is the result of decades of tireless effort, negotiation, and sustained advocacy within the United Nations system, including by the inspiring Indigenous leaders like Dr. Wilton Littlechild, who you heard from last week. As Dr. Littlechild recently told me, altogether, C-15 is a reconciliation call for justice and respect through implementation of solutions-based international treaties. I believe that implementing the declaration here in Canada is essential to advancing reconciliation with Indigenous peoples, and this has been made clear by both the Truth and Reconciliation Commission after 6 years of hearings and the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls after 3 years of listening to families and survivors. The TRC said the declaration charts a path for reconciliation to flourish in 21st century Canada. The inquiry's calls for justice also call on governments to immediately implement and fully comply with the declaration. The introduction of C-15 fulfills our government's commitment to introduce legislation to implement the declaration, establishing Bill C-262 as the floor rather than the ceiling. Prior to the bill's introduction, 33 bilateral sessions took place with AFN, ITK, MNC. In addition, more than 450 people participated in 28 regional engagement sessions, providing feedback and advice on potential enhancements to the consultation draft. Provincial and territorial governments, expert, and industry stakeholders also informed the development of the bill. While we acknowledge that some would have preferred a longer engagement, it was inclusive and meaningful, and the current bill reflects the content requested by many Indigenous partners. Extensive meetings were also held with Indigenous partners and other stakeholders after introduction to explain the bill's content and work on further enhancements. As Minister Lametti has noticed, engagement post-introduction informed some further amendments, which the government will be supporting. Co-development of the action plan will also be a further opportunity to work in close partnership on implementation. We've already begun preliminary discussions with Indigenous partners on the design of that process, and yesterday's budget 2021 proposes to provide $31.5 million over 2 years to support its co-development. Recognizing and respecting Indigenous rights mean that Indigenous peoples are at the table for decisions that impact their rights. In many cases, it means that economic development and stronger economic outcomes will be advanced with Indigenous peoples as partners. But the declaration is broader than economic development. I'm so grateful for my conversation with Mary Ellen Turpel-Lafond, who you also heard from last week on her findings about racism in healthcare in plain sight. She was very clear about Article 24 of the Declaration, that Indigenous individuals have an equal right to the enjoyment of the highest attainable standard of physical and mental health. States shall take the necessary steps with a view to achieving progressively the full realization of this right. This will be very important in guiding the future legislation on Indigenous health. I also remember how important it was during the summit on the child welfare to underline Article 7 of the Declaration that details the collective and individual rights to live free from violence, including the phrase forcibly remove children. The Declaration allows us all to develop a clear path so everyone can work together as partners with a shared stake in Canada's future. And as I've said before, implementing the Declaration is nothing to be frightened of. What is needed is fundamental and foundational change. It's about shedding our colonial past and writing the next chapter together as partners with Indigenous peoples. It has been more than 13 years since the Declaration was adopted by the General Assembly. I urge all members to support this fundamental and necessary change and support this bill. Thank you. Merci, miigwech, nakumik, marci.
Thanks, Minister. Thanks so much. And we're going to a 6-minute round of questioning. I have Mr. Schmale, Mr. Batiste, Madam Gill, and Ms. Gazan. Jamie, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair, and good morning, Minister. Thank you very much for your words. So, Minister, infrastructure projects like the Trans Mountain Expansion Pipeline involved consultation with close to 120 Indigenous groups, while the majority of these groups wanted to see the project proceed. 4 First Nations opposed the government's approval of the project and challenged it all the way to the Supreme Court. In the July 2020 Supreme Court decision, it ruled that the federal government's approval of the project would not be overturned and the project could proceed. The government had fulfilled its duty to consult, but some of these nations continued to fight it and vowed to do so, not recognizing the decision of the court. Minister, can you confirm that with the passage of C-15 that the federal government and provincial governments will retain their authority to make final decisions in the public interest on major projects, even where not all Indigenous rights holders agree?
Thanks for the great question, Jamie, because I think it really is important that people understand that even with Bill C-69, the issue is nothing about us without us. And it means that for good projects to go forward, Indigenous people should be at the table at the original design of the project. And this is happening in the North all the time, where Inuit are able at the table to determine good projects go forward, mediocre projects get made better, bad projects get rejected. And that's known right from the beginning. And so I think that this is, we're in a transition now where there are a number of projects that may have been seen as controversial, but this is what will provide the clarity going forward as to how this works. I think you've also underlined an important point that consensus is not unanimity. That there is going to be times where certain people object, but I think that the courts are holding up what is the duty to consult and accommodate, and that will be the way forward. And I think that this is the work that I'm doing on self-determination and nation rebuilding and trying to make sure, like in the North, that there's a voice for a nation that is consistent with the will of that community, and that we are able to go forward with a true government-to-government, nation-to-nation in a true partnership going forward.
So, Minister, will the framework and principles established over 2.5 decades of jurisprudence on Section 35 rights been thrown out? And if not, will you make this clear in the legislation?
Yes, I think even in Minister Lametti's remarks that it's very clear that that there is nothing in this bill that will detract from the Section 35 rights. The Section 35 rights is the Constitution of this country, and that we will go forward. But I think there is a view that there will be various ways of enhancing the rights going forward, but nothing in this bill would take away the rights that exist in Section 35.
Chair, how much time do I have?
3 minutes.
3 minutes, perfect. Minister, the First Nations LNG Alliance, Indigenous Resource Network, and the Indian Resource Council have said the uncertainty in the legislation makes it likely that it will be used as a legal strategy to delay and stymie resource development projects by groups that oppose extractive and other resource projects under any circumstances, even those where Indigenous nations are overwhelmingly in favor. Some would say that we want to make sure that C-15 protects Indigenous rights as self-determining nations to make decisions about their own resources. Now, right now, I don't think it's clear what changes the day Bill C-15 passes, but we do know that there is a range of views and expectations on this legislation, including among Indigenous groups. Some are saying it lacks clarity, will negatively impact the rights and ability of Indigenous groups to form business partnerships and pursue economic independence. So Minister, again, with the definition of free, prior, and informed consent in C-15, are you concerned that by not providing a definition, that this could leave it up to interpretation in the courts and ultimately delay the process of reconciliation, including the C-15 legislation, or what comes next after it?
Well, I think, thank you, Jamie. It's been very clear that this free, prior, and informed consent must not be interpreted as a veto. So in some ways, it's easier to define what it's not than it is as we go forward to insist, like in C-69, that Indigenous people are at the table at the first idea of a project. And so if, I think that what that means it's an ideal opportunity to form those partnerships for Indigenous people to have the benefit of the kinds of economic opportunities that would come out of building a project together, or in that kind of seizing on those kinds of opportunities. And so I think it's the opposite, that without this understanding that Indigenous people will be there at the table. Unfortunately, some projects went forward without talking to Indigenous people, and they ended up in court for a very long time, or blockades, or those kinds of things. So this gives you the clarity to say, nothing about us without us. And and then we will find that opportunity for the partnership. And I think there's so many partnerships, whether it's the James Bay Cree, there's just so many examples of how this works well for Indigenous communities.
It does. Yes. Sorry, Minister, I don't mean to cut you off. I do am short on
You're out of time. I'm sorry. We're done there, Jamie. We're at 6.5 minutes. We'll go to Mr. Batiste. 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'd also like to start off by thanking Minister Bennett for her work on Bill C-15 and her tremendous work in terms of working with a number of organizations to get their support on Bill C-15. I was really pleased to hear about the 33 bilateral sessions that was done with Assembly of First Nations, Métis National Council, and Inuit Taraposik Kanatami to help co-develop this bill. On top of the 27 years at the United Nations, where the UN Working Group was the first working group to have non-state actors at the same table during the drafting stages, where thousands of Indigenous voices contributed to what we have within UNDRIP. Also, I'm really pleased to see that within the budget, there's $31.5 million allocated over 2 years, ensuring co-development of an action plan on UNDRIP. So to me, it really seems that the work on reconciliation with Bill C-15 is just getting started. I wanted to speak a little bit about some of the fears that are out there. Some people have addressed through Section 35 about possible impact of Aboriginal and treaty rights. I believe that there's a strong derogation clause, but I'm wondering if you could take some time to speak to Section 35 rights and how we're, as a government, ensuring that we protect these rights, Aboriginal and treaty rights, within our government and within Bill C-15.
Thank you so much, and thank you for reminding us of the decades of work that have gone on to this, and I think that in this week at the UN Permanent Forum, for us to be able to thank Wilton Littlechild for all of his work, but so many other Canadians, some even and Indigenous representatives from Canada, like your family, Jaime, that you've lived this your whole life, and we're in such. I don't think we could have a stronger advocate. So, thank you for all you do. But also, I think that as in talking about the kind of engagement, I think I just want to say that I've been we want meaningful engagement. And that means that the excellent Bill 262 that Romeo Saganash brought forward was evergreened because the declaration is not to include two-spirited peoples and to make sure that it wasn't that the definitions of the diversity within Indigenous communities is in not only the preamble but in the body of the bills. So I think that this is an exciting time, and I think that it helps as reference to the UN Declaration is now in 8 of our bills in Canada, that C91, C92, that in intent and the commitments in the UN Declaration are now part of Canadian law and will serve to help people understand better what Section 35 rights mean, that Indigenous rights and treaty rights are not debatable. They exist, and they will continue to flourish with the understanding of all Canadians.
Thank you, Minister. And we heard from MNC's President David Chartrand, where he said this Bill C-15 is a what he called a blueprint for clarity. And I know that Assembly of First Nations National Chief Perry Bellegarde has talked about the need to see this get to royal assent. I'm wondering if you could elaborate a bit about the bilateral sessions and how our government worked with the constitutional voices in Canada to ensure that we were hearing from them as well.
Absolutely. And I think that the kind of legal team that you saw last week with Mary.
Oh. Mr. Clerk, I believe the minister's frozen.
Yes, that's what I'm seeing as well. I'll have someone reach out to her. Perhaps some of the officials present might be able to take questions in the meantime.
It's Daniel Comwatson, our Deputy Minister Chair. If I could maybe offer a bit of a completion of that.
Yes, go ahead, please.
So I think we've had over 70 different meetings and a number of experts from across the country engaged on multiple fronts. As the minister was noting, Mary Ellen Turpel-Lafond, but also many, many others, including conferences that we've run and sessions. One of the more interesting ones was with a large number of Indigenous law students from across the country. And so expertise, I think, is defined in many ways. There are those who have spent many years and a long time in the books, but there are those whose lives have been changed by their passion to change us for future generations. They've been involved too.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. And hopefully we can get the minister back for the next line of questionings. But that's all for me, Chair.
Thanks. And I'm sure that we'll be able to solve the technical issue. In the meantime, Madame Gill, s'il vous plaît. 6 minutes.
6 minutes, Madame Gill. Thank you very much, Chair. I'm not going to wait for the minister to be back with us. I will ask my questions. First of all, I wanted to thank the minister for being with us, and I wanted to point out that I would have also appreciated the participation of Minister Lametti as a member of the Bloc Québécois. I would have liked to have heard him about his intention in terms of being a legislature on the impact of this bill on the various jurisdictions in the provinces. So I might ask Madame Bennett to reassure us in his absence. Here in committee, we have heard things that are more or less exact with the bill, with respect to the bill. So I would have liked to have heard the minister on his intentions for moving the bill along, because there are concerns from Quebec and the provinces. In view of the fact that the minister has just rejoined us, she might not have heard the question. Mr. Chair, would you like me to answer the question so that the minister understands the question through my answer? Mr. Chair, well, really, here we're talking about federal legislation and the responsibilities of the federal government. Insofar as the declaration has an impact on the provinces and territories that exists quite independent of its impact on the federal government. My colleague, Madame Sargent, who works in the Department of Justice, might want to add something. But the responsibilities and activities are those of the federal government. I don't know if the minister would like to answer the question, but your answer is certainly very, very clear, sir. But if the minister does want to add anything, I don't want to deprive her of that opportunity. So, Madam Minister, there were fears that have been expressed, and I was hoping to have some clarification on that matter with respect particularly to the free, prior, and informed consent in terms of a veto or not. So can you distinguish between, can you draw a distinction between veto rights and free, prior, and informed consent? And also there is the issue of Section 35 rights. In light of the declaration, people might not understand why this is being passed. There is a difference. Or maybe they're the same. So why are they passing this legislation? Perhaps you can shed some light on this. Well, thank you so much for your question. And Mr. Combe-Watson did explain, as he said, C-15 applies to federal legislation only, in the same way that British Columbia brought in their own legislation in terms of the declaration. This is very important for all the provinces and territories to understand this clearly, that they have to understand the need but they must understand that Section 35 in the Constitution applies all over the country. Perhaps. I don't know how much time I have left with everything that's been happening, Mr. Chair, but I would... 2 minutes. So I'll ask you another question. A question on natural resources. It's in the same vein as my first question. There have been concerns expressed, fears and concerns about, amongst other colleagues, as to the sharing of resources. Can you give us an idea whether or not this will have a negative impact on the provinces and on Quebec, or will the impacts be positive? I believe that the example of the James Bay Cree is a very good example. That's a true partnership. The Indigenous communities were brought to the table at the very first step, and that should be the case, and there should be a real relation between the businesses themselves and the companies that are proposing certain projects. So, but that it affects the government of Quebec and the provincial governments, this sharing of the resources, does it not? Well, yes. It's in the Constitution. The land is the jurisdiction of the provinces, but there are natural resources. And I think of the future here that will be very important for Indigenous economies. And it has to be very clear. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much. And we go to Ms. Gazan, 6 minutes.
Thank you so much, Chair, and I'd like to thank the Minister for joining us today. Minister Bennett, year after year, records have shown that your department spends more than $100 million annually fighting Indigenous rights and status. And during the pandemic, with this new budget, my question is, how much have you budgeted to fight Indigenous peoples in courts? Because you talk about reconciliation, and I would argue that fighting against fundamental Indigenous human rights is not an act of reconciliation.
I think that we know that we've got to do better, but we also know that certain rights affect other rights. And I think that there's been within Indigenous communities, and whether that's survivors of residential schools or whether it's children in the child welfare system, our job is to make sure that we go forward with fairness and justice. And unfortunately, we are taking to court,
I'll give you a couple of examples.
Yeah.
The Canadian Human Rights Tribunal ruling to immediately stop racially discriminating against First Nations kids. The fact that your department continues to fight St. Anne's residential schools in court, 60 Scoop survivors. We know that we want to do better. You didn't answer my question. How much have you budgeted to fight Indigenous people, to continue to fight Indigenous rights and status in courts in this budget?
With due respect, my job is to get out of court on so many of these aspects, and whether it's specific claims or whether it's comprehensive claims or whether it's all of these childhood litigation. We have settled from Anderson to 60 Scoop to we just keep settling these claims, and there are some that are a little bit more difficult than others, but we want to do right and right past wrongs, and we
Minister, with all due respect, I think the survivors of St. Anne's residential school would say otherwise, or all the kids who continue to be racially discriminated against, with your government indicating that you will, in quotes, will not pay what's been ordered by the Canadian Human Rights Tribunal ruling. I say this, Minister Bennett, because you have the power to immediately implement Article 22 of Bill C-15, which states the following. This is quotes. Particular attention shall be paid to the rights and special needs of Indigenous elders, women, youth, children, and persons with disabilities in the implementation of the Declaration. But knowing all of this, why do you choose instead to keep fighting First Nations children, for example, in court? Why have you failed to implement a national action plan to address the epidemic levels of violence and murder of Indigenous women and girls in Two-Spirit across this country? I know you had a budget announcement. However, the report was released on June 3rd, 2019. No action. No action. Where's the action plan?
So thank you for that. But I also want to say that the Minister Miller's been very clear that the children will be compensated, and there will be a fair compensation that meets the needs of those that were in care for their whole adolescence and those that were in care for a very short time. This has to be done properly so that people aren't re-victimized. I think that it's going to be, I'm very optimistic about the 100 women and two-spirited people working towards a national action plan. I think I was a bit optimistic 2 years ago that we would be able to get that done in a year, and I just am so proud that we said we would need to get it right, and with the partners that we've got working on it is so impressive. And
well,
I think
Minister,
that they will
I think we need to move on here, but I have to say I'm not very proud of this current government and the fact that on their watch women and girls and children continue to die because of this incremental approach to justice that your government has shown. I want to move specifically on to the bill. There's been several recommendations that have been brought forth to the committee in testimony and written submissions. For example, one, deleting preambular paragraph 6, B, adding a subsection Article 2.4, for greater certainty, the rights of Indigenous people, including treaty rights, must be interpreted flexibly so as to permit their evolution over time, and any approach constituting frozen rights must be rejected. Another amendment, adding subsection 2.5, for greater certainty, nothing in this act is to be construed as to diminish or extinguish the rights of Indigenous peoples, including treaty rights. The Living Tree Doctrine. Is your government open to amending Bill C-15 to honor what has been called on by nations across this country to include the Living Tree Doctrine?
Thanks for that. And I just wanted to go back to say that I find it hard to hear you say that there's been no action on missing and murdered when we've been building really since 2015 on the determinants, the causes, and the cause of the causes, and $2.2 billion in yesterday's budget. So, I think this is what we have to do. To stop the tragedy, concrete actions to stop the tragedy.
Minister, that wasn't my question, but I think you should tell that to the 3 women and young girls who lost their life in my riding since the pandemic, that your government is doing enough. I would argue not. I think that's the end of my time.
Yes, I'm sorry, we are at time. And unfortunately, Minister Bennett had informed us that she would have to depart at noon, offered us a few more minutes, but in fairness, we couldn't get a complete round of questioning in the time that's been made available. So,
Mr. Chair, I can stay. I am supposed to be at the Cabinet Committee on Health and Social Affairs, but the co-chair is going to start the meeting. So I can make sure you get the full round.
Okay, let's go then to the 5-minute round. Mr. Vidal, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Minister, for being here today. I want to first, before I get into my own questions, I want to follow up on where my colleague, Mr. Schmale, was ending his round with you in that whole discussion around kind of FPIC and a veto. And we've had many witnesses talk to us in the last several meetings that free, prior, and informed consent does not mean a veto, and you confirmed that again today. I guess my question would simply be then, why not actually just put that in the legislation, or would the government be opposed to an amendment that would include that in the legislation?
Well, I know Minister Lametti and the government is looking at all the potential to amendments being put forward, including what Deputy Gazan had said, but it is I think most people feel that the free, prior, and informed consent has been it needs to stand on its own as it does in the declaration. There's nothing about free, prior, and informed consent in the legislation itself. It is embracing the declaration as it is, and I think that the kind of what has formed not only the preamble but the body of the bill is not going to I think frighten people because we want to just be able to go forward.
Thank you, Minister. But the fact of the matter is, from the number of people that I've talked to, especially Indigenous business organizations that make an income in the natural resource sector, and those dividends, those proceeds from that sector go back into their communities to address social issues, to reduce poverty, to recreation, housing, to suicide prevention, and those people that have a mandate of reducing poverty on First Nations in Canada are the ones that are raising the concern about the lack of clarity or the lack of certainty around that definition. So I guess that's where I push for clarity on behalf of those folks that are trying to do tremendous work in the First Nations communities in my riding and across the country. And so I guess I'm going to come back again. Would you personally support the concept of just bringing that clarity by actually saying in the legislation that this is not a veto?
I think that where we know we need to go forward is that in the duty to consult, the duty to accommodate, that is a broad approach without definition, and that again, that the norms for that continue to evolve. And I think there is a complete consensus that this is not a veto, and I think that we are going to obviously consider all the possible amendments, but I think I do worry about that one.
Thank you. I would come back and say, you know what, if all of these people say it's not, let's just put it there and then we have clarity. Let me move on to something different though. Before the pandemic began in the early part of 2020, the front pages in Canada were very much centered around who has the authority to withhold or provide consent in litter projects. And Minister, you're right in the middle of that, obviously. I guess my follow-up question to you would be, would it not seem appropriate to allow some time and space for Indigenous communities and their leaders to find the answer to the question as to who has the authority, who has the ability to speak on behalf of their people before we jump into some of these things? I'm fearful that and sorry, I get the importance of this. I support so much of what's in this legislation, but with the lack of consensus even within the First Nations communities, does this lead to some challenges for us down the road that you were walking through literally personally in the early part of 2020?
Thanks for the question. I think it really speaks to the urgency of us really investing in nation rebuilding and being able to decolonize and support nations rebuilding themselves so they can take decisions as a group, but the decision is taken based on the wishes of the community. These aren't taken by any particular group, and we know that in certain parts, so whether that's a treaty organization where they take a decision as a treaty governance or how we move forward. And I think that's going to be, and it's exciting to see some of these communities really building a hybrid model between traditional and hereditary leadership and the elected leadership. It's just amazing to watch because, again, the UN Declaration really and its push for self-determination really is inspiring in terms of getting that hard work done.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry, we're at 5 minutes. And Ms. Zan, 5 minutes, go ahead.
Thank you very much. And I do come to you today from the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq. Thank you, Minister. It's great to see you again, and thank you for all your hard work. There's so much to do on this file, and I just want to say I think you're doing an amazing job, so thank you very much. I was really glad that you made a point in your notes earlier today when you said that while it's very important that UNDRIP deals with more than consultation with resource development projects with impacted Indigenous communities. This was a very good point because last week we heard here on the committee from Beth Symes on behalf of the Paktutit, who also made this point, and she asked us to look at this through the lens of Indigenous women, and specifically Articles 21 and 24 of UNDRIP, which deal with the promise of better social conditions for Indigenous peoples. So could you please speak to us a little bit further, a little bit more broader on the nature of the principles in UNDRIP and how important that is as a framework for everything from healthcare to family services to other issues of social well-being for Indigenous peoples across Canada? Thank you.
Thank you so much. And it speaks to what decolonizing means. I mean, people were saying that, you know, I think in the Hollow Water study, it said that what was once seen as healing is now decolonization therapy. It means that this is about leadership. This is about, as settlers, having the humility that was missing when Europeans arrived to think their ways were better. And so what I see in Article 21, it is about First Nations, Inuit, Métis developing their own health, social programs and education, vocational training, retraining. All of that needs to be in the hands, needs to be Indigenous led. And I think that we certainly have seen that, Lenore, during COVID, that when the Indigenous leadership knows exactly what needs to be done and the government's there to support their priorities and support their way forward, that we know that we get much better results, as we've seen even during the third wave. So this is, I think it is about humility and being able to support a way forward designed by the Indigenous professionals, but also their political leadership.
Thank you. And I would have to agree as well, coming from Australia, where the Aboriginal people, the First Peoples, were put in jail for burning off their land at a certain time of year, where the colonials, they did not understand why they were doing that. And now years later, they realize, oh, they're doing it because it helps to prevent major forest fires, because they knew 60,000 years ago what needs to be done to the land to keep it healthy. If we had only listened to more of them all around the world, I think we wouldn't be in as bad place, climate change or in any other way. Minister, you know, your remarks also note that in addition to the specific Truth and Reconciliation Commission calls to action 43 and 4, which call on governments to fully adopt and implement the declaration and develop an action plan to achieve those goals, the declaration is referenced through the calls to action. And it's also referenced in the final report of the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Women and Girls. So could you please expand upon why you think the Truth and Reconciliation Commission and National Inquiry both have emphasized the declaration as such a key part of reconciliation? And I would like to hear some of your own views on why this international document is so essential to advancing reconciliation here in Canada.
We have less than a minute. Go ahead.
Thanks so much. And no, I think it is so important that it is about self-determination. And I think that both the Truth and Reconciliation Commissioners and the Commissioners for the National Inquiry understood that it is that recognition of rights, respect, cooperation, and partnership that we have to move forward that way. And that's really what the UN Declaration does. It says this is the right to self-determination, to make your own decisions and to be able to design the programs as you see fit, and the health, education, economic outcomes then soar, as we know. So I think that this is a really important time in the history of Canada where we get to turn this around from paternalism to true partnership.
Thanks, Minister. We're going to take Ms. Gill and Ms. Gazan for 2.5 minutes each and then conclude. Ms. Gill, Madame Gill, s'il vous plaît.
Madame Gill, thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to the Minister. for being so generous in remaining with us. I'm come back to the questions that I asked earlier on about free, prior, and informed consent. It seems to me that it's there in the bill without being attached to in any other concept. So can you explain two things? Why can you not be more specific in the legislation itself? And what can this, how can this be assimilated to a veto right by some? Thank you for your question. I think that the consensus on the absence of a veto, of having one, is very clear. And I think also that FPIC in French comes back to during the bill. During it was felt that it was not necessary to reach a consensus with our partners. Now is certainly important. It's very difficult, though, for us to push a definition without the consensus of the Indigenous peoples.
Merci.
Thank you.
Est-ce que j'avais encore du temps?
Do I still have time, Chair? Very little? Very little? Yes? Oh, a minute. That's wonderful. So I'd like to ask a question on another matter with respect to women that was mentioned in a previous testimony. There was an analysis that was done of the bill through the lens of gender analysis plus. Did you do that analysis? Well, yes. Absolutely, and I think it is possible to give you the GBA plus analysis. Thank you very much, because women's groups want to integrate it into other documents. If it's possible to send the GBA plus analysis to the committee, we can integrate it into our work. And also, the commitment with young Indigenous lawyers, the inclusion of the Two-Spirit and the gender diverse Indigenous, that is a step forward, progress in the concept of sexuality.
To interrupt. We have Ms. Gazan for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Going back to amendments that have been recommended through testimony and written submissions to our committee, is your government willing to make the following amendments, deleting preambular paragraph 6, to adding a subsection article 2.4 for greater, which indicates for greater certainty, the rights of Indigenous people, including treaty rights, must be interpreted flexibly so as to permit their evolution over time, and any approach constituting or constituting frozen rights must be rejected. And 3, adding subsection 2.5 for greater certainty, nothing in this act is to be construed as to diminish or extinguish the rights of Indigenous peoples, including treaty rights.
Well, thank you for that, and thank you for the hard work on the amendments, the possible amendments. And I think that obviously everything is being considered, but I think that we will want to make sure that again, with our partners and what was in the consultation document, that we will need to do our best efforts in achieving a consensus.
I asked that because I know particularly the latter two amendments I proposed speak to the importance of recognizing and respecting the living tree, a doctrine, an amendment that was certainly put forward by former Member of Parliament Romeo Saganash, as well as the Assembly of First Nations. I think it's important that this government certainly respect those amendments, and I'm hoping that we see those amendments as we go through clause by clause of the bill.
And I guess I would just say that as we go to work on the action plan, and as you know, the action plan's already begun its work. Places like Yukon are already going to work on this, and that evergreening of the bill is going to be really important in terms of a living tree, living document as it goes forward. So I think that whether it's in the bill or whether it's part of the action plan, I think that those are the deliberations that Minister Lametti is doing now.
And thank you for that.
Very much.
Thanks, Ms. Gazan. And Mr. Bennett, thank you. Thanks for delaying your other appearance for us. We'll suspend very momentarily and retain all of our witnesses, as well as adding 2 more. So suspension of the committee. And once again, thank you to the minister. And we have the department officials ready to answer the questions, as has been introduced. So let us go now to the first round of questions. And I've got to find my right order. We're at Mr. Viersen. Mr. Viersen, please go ahead for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank my witnesses for being here today as well. To the Justice Department folks, I just am trying to figure out Section 4A, where it says that UNDRIP would have application in Canadian law. Is there any other UN declarations? I'm thinking like the Declaration on the Rights of the Child or the Palermo Protocol. Is there any of these other instruments that I use from time to time that are explicitly stated that they have application in Canadian law? Many of them we use to kind of determine and draft our laws here in Canada, but is there any of them that we have? I've done a Google search, I can't find any, but is there any other instance where we've legislated a UN declaration with application in Canadian law? Ms. Sargent?
Yes, good morning, and thank you for the question. The wording that is found in this bill is unique relative to others. All that said, there are examples, and I think of the Immigration Refugee Protection Act, which speaks to the role of international human rights instruments in interpreting the law, interpreting that law. So there are some examples. All that said, the way the government reads Clause 4A is really a reflection of the state of the law as the courts have told us it exists. That is that declarations such as the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples can be used to inform the interpretation of legislation, of the Constitution, and therefore have application in Canadian law.
But that doesn't change anything then when you're saying that 4A doesn't change any the workings on the ground. Whether like the Palermo Protocol or the rights of the child also have application in Canadian law, you can come to court with that as a document and say, hey, there's child's rights are being violated because of the UN declaration. Is that the case?
So I think that the way you've explained it is appropriate in the sense that claimants can bring international instruments before courts already and explain how they relate to either their legal arguments under the Charter or under other legislation. And this provision really is a recognition of that same point. All that said, there is value to recognizing the role that this declaration can play given its importance and the recognition that it has at international fora and by Indigenous peoples as well as governments in relation to interpreting and applying Canadian law.
Given that this section 4A is kind of unique and kind of the first time we're using it, will articles of UNDRIP be actionable in Canadian courts?
So that is, I think, something that we already see. In other words, Indigenous claimants are invoking the declaration where they view it as a helpful supplement to their arguments under Canadian law. And so, we wouldn't see this provision necessarily changing or having a significant impact in that regard. But it does, of course, make it clear that the federal government needs to be mindful of the declaration when it approaches its own interpretations of federal legislation and the Constitution, among others. And so it really does signal, I think, the importance that the government places on the declaration as a source of interpretation for legislation in Canada.
With our trafficking in persons laws that we've brought in this country, we've used the Palermo Protocol. Would you say that the Palermo Protocol has the same actionableness in Canadian law as UNDRIP at this point, or does this change that? Does Section 4A change?
So I must say that I'm not an expert in the Palermo Protocol and exactly how it may be used in that context. But what I can say is that generally speaking, the federal government, when it moves to implement international treaties in Canadian law, can take a number of different approaches. And in this case, what we see is the government really taking, when I say the government, I also reflect Bill C-262 and the approach that it took, really an approach of recognizing the role of the declaration as an interpretive instrument relevant to interpreting our laws. It's not, and I think we heard other witnesses before the committee say this as well, it's not an attempt to take the declaration and make it itself a federal law, which is sometimes the way that that international instruments are integrated into Canadian law. And we would say that that's not the case here.
Mm-hmm. And that's just about our time. Thanks, Arnold. Mr. Pawlowski, 6 minutes.
Sorry, I'm having trouble getting my unmute. So we've heard numerous times the assertion that this would create uncertainty. What is the meaning of free, prior, and informed consent? Now, I understand that we're not the first jurisdiction to implement UNDRIP or to attempt in some way to incorporate the provisions of UNDRIP in our domestic law. Can you tell us what other jurisdictions experience has been with respect to implementing UNDRIP and how they've interpreted free and informed prior consent. And I guess that includes British Columbia if you're unaware of as to what internationally what other jurisdictions have done. Thanks.
Thanks for the question. I will perhaps start with the BC example, which, as you say, is the one most familiar to us. And again, the legislation in relation to the UN Declaration does not define free, prior, and informed consent. The approach taken was very much to articulate during legislative procedure, as here, what the government's understanding of that concept was, and the importance, of course, of aligning, in that case, BC's laws with free, prior, and informed consent as really a guidepost, something that will be implemented in a number of different contexts. And Minister Bennett spoke to that as well, across social, economic resources, and so on. In terms of other countries' experience, I will say that as I understand it, there are not a lot of other countries that have specifically legislated the UN Declaration's implementation, but there are several in Latin America, I believe Colombia and elsewhere, who have look to the Declaration to inform their own constitutions. But of course, each country is very unique and will take a different approach. And Article 38 of the Declaration really speaks to that it's for each country to take its own approach in implementing the Declaration, rather, in a manner that reflects its traditions, its Indigenous peoples, its constitution, and its laws. Thanks.
Do you know if there have been any cases in British Columbia so far since they enacted their law related to Indigenous rights, Aboriginal rights? And there been any attempts by British Columbia courts to interpret that provision?
So I will ask that my colleagues from Justice who are on the line may want to provide a further response to this. My understanding is that as that legislation is quite recent, there are not a lot of cases where it's been used as a basis for decision yet. I'm sure it has been invoked in a couple of cases, but I'll ask my colleague Corin Marriott if there's anything she'd like to add to that response.
Thanks, Laurie. Yeah, so we know that it has been raised in a few cases together with other arguments about the Declaration, but I'm not aware of any decisions yet where the court has addressed the bill directly.
Okay, let me totally change tack. So our government adopted the principles of UNDRIP back in 2015. And my understanding, the government has been working on implementing the principles of UNDRIP since 2015. Can you tell us what the government has been doing to implement the principles of UNDRIP since 2015? Thanks.
I will be pleased to provide an initial response and then see if my colleague Ross Patty from Crown Indigenous Relations may wish to add, because this really has been a whole of government effort to implement and reflect the principles of the UN Declaration across the federal system. And Minister Bennett mentioned, I think there are already many laws that do reflect the Declaration itself in their language, their preambles or their purpose clauses. So we have the Act respecting Indigenous or First Nations, Inuit, Métis children, youth, and families, Bill C-92, the Indigenous Languages Act passed in the previous government, the preamble to Bill C-69, the impact assessment legislation. So there are many examples in legislation itself. And then, of course, the declaration has been informing a lot of the work that Crown Indigenous Relations is doing in a number of different areas, including in their recognition of rights tables and the negotiations there. So with your permission, I could, or the chair's permission rather, I could ask if Ross might also wish to add anything.
Unfortunately, it would have to be done in 5 seconds. So, Paul, maybe it'll come up again, but thank you. Madame Gill, s'il vous plaît.
Madam Gill. Thank you very much, Chair. I'd like to go a little further with respect to possibility of government interference in provincial jurisdictions. It was very clear that there was a possibility, but it was also an issue of communication with the public to clarify things and to prevent people from really living in a state of worry. My question is this. Has the government cooperated and collaborated in communicating what really is in C-15 to the people of Quebec and the other provinces? Thank you.
Oui, alors,
yes, there were discussions with the provinces and the territories, in particular, two discussions at the deputy minister level with all provincial and territorial DMs, and also at the ministerial level, during which the provinces and territories were able to ask questions and made it known what their concerns were with respect to the bill. Just to add to Minister Bennett's answer, I would draw your attention to the preamble, where there is a paragraph that speaks to the role of the provinces and territories. And here I quote that the provincial and territorial governments and the municipal administrations all have the responsibility of contributing to the implementation of the declaration through diverse measures that are part of their field of jurisdiction, their administration. So we do recognize that the bill does recognize various areas of jurisdiction in Canada. Do I still have time, Chair? Do I still have time, Chair? I can't hear.
Oui, encore 3 minutes.
Quelques secondes.
A few seconds? Well, same thing. The time. Well, the minister spoke to briefly sections 35 and 15 and said that C-15 and section 35 wouldn't give rise to concern. So what can you add to the minister's response? And I thank you once again for doing so. Yes, thank you. Just to backtrack a little, first of all, I want to point out that the bill, with respect to the bill, you have to understand that as it is set out in its goals clause, in terms of the framework of the declaration, it is a commitment on the part of the federal government to work in partnership with Indigenous peoples to implement the declaration in the federal areas and federal policy. But this being said, there are elements that will require far more dialogue. And this is what the bill commits the government to do. As has been pointed out, the guiding principles that are in it for the government and Indigenous peoples, the government relies on the obligation to consult. But beyond that obligation, that is to say we have to find creative, constructive ways of working together with Indigenous people in all areas where the principles will apply.
Soixante secondes.
60 seconds. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Perhaps one last question on the other fears that exist. Perhaps Madam Sargent could go a little further. In my previous questions, I elucidated some of the fears that the people have. And can you add to that all the people, the Indigenous peoples and others who are concerned about the legislation? Well, I think that the suggestion that I would offer would be this. As I said, this bill puts in place a framework dealing with the federal government's commitment to develop an action plan that will deal with issues, and the application has to be tangible in a variety of contexts, but also it has to combat racism, discrimination, and all other matters like that that could impede cooperation and collaboration.
Thank you. Ms. Gazan, 6 minutes.
Thank you so much, Chair. I guess I'll ask this of Madame Sargent. Concerns have been raised about the lack of consultation with individual Indigenous rights holders. Moving forward, certainly in the action plan, how does your department plan to consult with Indigenous people and peoples on the ground?
Thank you very much for the question, and it is certainly something that we are mindful of and reflecting on in light of the experience leading up to the introduction of Bill C-15. We recognize that legislation had undergone a great deal of engagement already, and that there was some urgency to bringing it forward, and therefore that the engagement process was shorter than many would have liked. All that said, moving forward with respect to the action plan, we are absolutely wanting to engage more broadly. And on that, I'd be pleased to turn it over to my colleague Ross Petty, who's also thinking about this through the lens of the work that Crown Indigenous Relations does in engaging with Indigenous peoples. All that to say, we see it as a joint project going forward. But with permission of the chair, I'd like to pass it over to Ross for some further response.
Thank you very much. Thanks for that important question. Of course, we are already engaged right now in moving forward. As you heard from the minister, the budget yesterday has allotted over $31 million for consultation and engagement with a variety of people who have an interest in this legislation as it moves forward. So our plan is quite comprehensive, extensive, and will involve all Indigenous partners, rights holders, industry, individual Indigenous rights. And it's going to be very important that we complete that process so that we come up with the best action plan possible. Thank you.
My question, you mentioned the $31 million. How have any decisions been made about how that funding will be allocated? Like who's going to control that allocation of funding for consultations?
So I only learned that it was approved and put forward at about 4:30 yesterday. And so the answer to your question is there's no decisions that have been made yet. What I can tell you based on my previous answer is it's going to be important that we use that money effectively to ensure that everyone's voices are heard and that we all work together on a collaborative action plan as we move forward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Just another question. There's been questions raised about the 3-year duration for the development of the action plan. I'm wondering why your department decided that the 3-year time frame was necessary to develop an action plan when we've been, as we've heard around the committee table, discussing the rights enshrined in the Declaration for the last 3 decades. Why did you feel it necessary for it to have the 3 years?
Yeah, so I'll take that to answer also, I believe. So I just want to remind folks that it says that the plan needs to be developed within 3 years. So it's up to 3 years. I also understand that there's a proposal to potentially look at shortening that time frame. The reason that we had put that possibility of that time frame in is that we need to work in consultation. This needs to be a consultative engagement plan, and that's going to take some time to do, and it's going to take some time to do effectively. And so if we're given 2 years to do that, we will do it in 2 years for sure. But I want to just reiterate that it's about making sure that we get the right voices heard to get the plan as strong and as effective as possible. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. My next question, just because this is a question that's raised every committee, you know, I know the minister responded to this question, but I'd like to hear the thoughts of the witnesses currently on the panel. If you could clarify your government's understanding of the difference between veto and FPIC. Either or is fine.
Sorry, I can take that. And I may ask my colleague Sandra Leduc, who's also working on this file, to supplement. And so I think, you know, from the government's perspective, what the focus is really on is on free, prior, and informed consent as positive expression of the need for us to work in partnership and collaboration with Indigenous peoples in all aspects of work that may impact on their rights and interests. So the focus is very much on this more positive aspect of it, and less on this idea of veto, which of course finds no expression. It's not found in the Declaration itself. It is a way of articulating, I think, a lot of fears about what free, prior, informed consent means, but it is not grounded in the understanding of the Declaration or the concept as we understand it. But perhaps I'll ask if Sandra would like to add anything to that response.
Very quickly, please.
All right, thanks so much, Lori, and thank you so much for the question. Very quickly, FPIC implies context. You need to take context into consideration. Whereas when you're talking about veto, you're not talking about the position or the facts. It's devoid of that context. So that is why FPIC is very different and needs to be looked at each and every time based on the context.
Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Members of the committee, in order to complete the round of questioning, we're going to have to extend. We also need to discuss Mr. Schmale's motion from the past hour and whether it matters. So could I have a motion to extend past 1 o'clock?
Mr. Chair, I'm just wondering, so by extending, are we just talking 2 5-minute and 2 2.5-minute rounds, or are you?
That's right. Just completing this round.
Okay. So that I can move that motion to extend.
Thank you. All in favor? Carried. Thank you. So we'll carry on with the 5-minute round, which will complete the questioning today. Mr. Melillo, go ahead, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I thank our witnesses for joining us for this discussion. And I'm going to put my question out there, and I'm not going to address it to anyone specifically. So whoever wants to jump in, please do so. One of the things that's interested me is that we've heard a lot from from Indigenous people, Indigenous organizations that don't feel that there has been an adequate consultation in terms of C-15. We've even heard testimony in this committee from some Indigenous organizations. The Native Women's Association comes to mind. This is a group that had expressed concerns about the consultation process, and I do find it quite ironic that when we're talking about C-15, obviously the government has been emphasizing that this is in the spirit of reconciliation. However, there seems to be some gaps and some failures in terms of adequate consultation with Indigenous peoples, and to me, this runs contrary, of course, to what the government is trying to do. I do not doubt for a second the intentions of this bill. However, it does seem that the government has missed the mark. So I'm wondering, again, whoever wants to jump in, if anyone can share some of the insights into the consultation process that has happened for C-15, and if you believe there could have been a greater diversity of Indigenous organizations represented in this consultation.
So maybe I'll start, Lori. Thank you very much for that question. So as we've heard, and as you've heard, the time frame to meet the commitment to introduce this bill by the end of the calendar year was indeed tight. Having said that, there were over 70 meetings involving over 450 people that took place in that compressed time frame. And I've said before that it's not really the quantity of engagement that's important, it's the quality of the engagement. And as Minister Bennett has noted, many of those discussions resulted in improvements to the bill as it was introduced. I'd like to relate just quickly to the question from the previous member, which was around the going forward plan. And part of the reason that the budget is allotted over $31 million is to make sure that we have a more robust engagement strategy going forward. And we're working on that right now, and we've already begun those discussions with a number of key players. So there'll be opportunities for many interested parties to have a say in that plan and the action plan as we move forward. Thank you.
Anybody else want to comment on that question before moving on?
Well, if I may perhaps just add a couple of considerations. As you may well be aware, there is a What We Learned report that is available on the Department of Justice's UN Declaration website that does speak to the engagement that took place and very much shows, as Ross said, the level of and the quality of input that we received, even though the period was relatively compressed. And I will just note that contributions from groups including the National Women's Association of Canada and WAC, did very much influence the bill as it currently is drafted, including preambular paragraphs relating to the importance of taking diversity and gender into account in implementing this legislation. Thanks.
Thank you very much, both, for those comments. With the time I have, I'll just quickly ask.
2 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ask if there was consultation with Indigenous organizations, Indigenous people, specifically around the question of FPIC, around consent, and how that should be interpreted. I don't know if Ms. Sargent, if you wanted to jump in there.
So I'm afraid the question just cut off just before I got on, but I had understood specifically with respect to free, prior, and informed consent, discussions with Indigenous groups, is that our Indigenous partners. So, the issue of FPIC and how it is understood did come up. Although I would say that in many ways the focus of engagement was much more on the legislation itself and what it should contain. And as the term is not defined in the bill, as has been noted, it was not the key topic of discussion. There were, however, roundtables held with industry, mining, forestry, energy, petroleum, in which Indigenous organizations also participated. And there were discussions about the concept and its meaning and implications. And so there have been, certainly, we heard feedback on that as well.
Thank you very much. I do believe I'm well over time, Mr. Chair. I have a 5-minute slot.
Pretty much there. So
yeah,
thanks.
So we'll have to end it there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Vancouverton, 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I apologize in advance for my connection today. I'm experiencing the same Rogers challenges and difficulties that many people are connecting in the GTA are. So if I drop off, then I'll simply cede my time to the chair. But my question is basically twofold, and it starts with what I've perceived as a mischaracterization of what free, prior, and informed consent is and will be. Initially, a few meetings ago, it was characterized as a veto. FPIC's a veto. We've kind of gotten past that a little bit, which is good. We're making progress. But then, after that, we got to the point with the other side that, it's advanced disclosure is the status quo and it's totally adequate and it's always worked. And why would we change it? Again, not something I agree with, but it seems like we're past that point now as well. And then most recently, today's meeting included, it's the question is now, don't we just need a definition of this ambiguous term, free, prior, and informed consent? I disagree. I don't think it's ambiguous. It's very, very clear what it is, and it implies partnership and involvement and engagement rather than just telling somebody in advance what's going to happen. In addition to that, more recently, we've heard that since there are a variety of valid concerns and not surprisingly, a lack of total unanimity on the final product of what this will look like and how it should be implemented, that there has then certainly lacked the adequate amount of consultation with community and industry. So my question is twofold. One, is the definition of FPIC necessary, or does it already exist? And two, is total unanimity ever a reasonable ambition worthy of pursuing throughout these consultations? And I'd start with Madam Sargent.
So thank you for the question. Some important threads there. And in respect to the first question with respect regarding a definition of the free, prior, and informed consent, I think Minister Bennett provided very helpful responses. First, that because this concept or right is not defined in the legislation, it would be in fact somewhat strange to define it in the bill, but also that it is something, as my colleague explained as well, that has to be understood in context, and therefore trying to define it in a single way, a unique, one sort of a one-shot definition would be very challenging indeed. So those are considerations when we look to defining terms in legislation such as this bill. With respect to your other question about the pursuit of total unanimity, I think that is something that, is a challenge in all contexts for every bill in every context. It's not usually the standard, but I will leave it to others to speak more to the political considerations, I think, behind some of that. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else that might have some insight on those two questions? No, I'll cede my remaining time to the chair.
Thank you very much. We'll move then to Ms. Gill for 2.5 minutes. Please go ahead.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Thank you very much, Chair. I would also like to further pursue a question that I asked earlier. I want to be sure that I understood. I wanted to know whether or not there was a GBA plus analysis that had been carried out for the bill, and I was told that yes, there was. But the premise of my question was this: there are women's groups that have mentioned that there were elements missing in the bill. So that's why I was asking if there was a GBA plus analysis that was made beforehand. Why then would if there is such an analysis, why then do these women's groups ask questions and feel that there are elements missing in the bill? Thank you. Ms. Gill, please.
I've had the volume of the French and the translation in English equal, and I found it very hard to hear. Was this for everyone? Did we have this? Could it just be my own system? I just want to make sure that the translation was clear. Mr. Clerk?
Yes, Mr. Chair, that's likely an issue that only you're experiencing. It's a known bug, often related to the Zoom not being fully up to date. I know I had to update mine today, so that may be what's causing it for you.
So, Madam Gill, I have your question, and you will have a full 2 minutes for a response. Go ahead. Is someone prepared to respond to Ms. Gill? Ms. Sargent?
Yes, I can certainly answer. But once again, I might turn to my colleague Sandra Leduc, who participated in the commitments with the Indigenous groups. I just want to say that, like all political projects, we carried out an analysis taking into consideration gender-based issues, and as it was not just part of a document intended for cabinet. As I have said, there are changes and amendments to be made to the bill based on the concerns of women's groups, Indigenous women's groups. But it's up to them to tell you whether or not they are satisfied with the changes that were made. Maybe Sandra can speak to the changes. Thank you very much, Laurie. Very quickly, I'd like to say that yes, indeed, we did get a lot of comment from the groups representing women throughout Canada, that is to say, Indigenous women throughout Canada. And those comments really did help us strengthen the bill by including references that you see in the preamble concerning the missing and murdered Indigenous women's inquiry, and also the need to collaborate and consult with women, and so on. So we really did change the bill and amend it in that sense, modify it to make it stronger. Thank you.
Thanks, Madam Gill. Ms. Kazan, 2.5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Chair. And, just building on the comments of Madame Gill, even comments in terms of what has occurred in the committee, a real lack of lack of Indigenous voices, women's voices in the process. Going forward in consultation, how are women's voices, women and Two-Spirit voices going to be included in this process as Indigenous women, girls, 2S LGBTQIA are on the forefront of this human rights crisis, including around resource extractions that perpetrate where we see higher rates of violence perpetrated against Indigenous women and girls within on our own very own lands. Yet our voices are often marginalized, even more marginalized than that of resource extraction companies. We've heard a lot of consultation with mining. I'm wondering, moving forward in the consultation process, how we will ensure that Indigenous women's voices and Two-Spirit will be lifted up in this process.
Thank you for that important question. I think I'm going to turn to my my colleague, Ms. Israel, to respond, if that's okay, Mr. Chair.
Ms. Israel.
Thank you so much for the question, and I think you're quite right that already in the course of our work, we have engaged with women's organizations in particular, having heard from them prior to the bill's introduction. But to your point, some interesting observations that we've heard from Paktouti, for example, and from NWAC, from Paktouti, they've made the point and has stressed the point that the engagement with, for example, NIOs has been important, with land claims organizations have been, critical, but they have definitely made the point of emphasizing the need to have Inuit women's voices, for example, at the table. They've made the point of women who are inhabiting in cities and the needs in particular that they face there. So all of that has come to bear in informing us as we move forward. And certainly the relationships that we have established, will continue to establish, will continue to inform our thinking moving forward on the development of the action plan. Thanks.
Yes, thank you.
Was that
time? Sorry, Chair. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Sorry.
Thank you for your response.
Thank you. Mr. Vidal, 5 minutes. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm sorry, I'm not, to the witnesses, I'm not going to claim to be a lawyer here, but I'm going to read you something from a submission and ask for some clarification from your perspective. So I'm not pretending to reflect legal opinion here, but the committee members received a submission from a Mr. Dwight Newman, who's got a very impressive resume as a professor of law and Canada Research Chair in Indigenous Rights and Constitutional International Law from the University of Saskatchewan. He talks about many of his writings being widely cited in Canadian courts and by scholars both within Canada and the international community. He goes on to talk about some other things, but obviously a very, very respected voice in many of these issues. And one of the comments out of his brief that he says is parliamentarians should seriously think about whether they wish to adopt a statute that has these sorts of outstanding interpretive difficulties, or if it would be better to improve upon the drafting to attain greater clarity. And I'll skip ahead a little bit. Parliament should consider asking for improved language that adds clarity, legal briefings on why particular language is thought to have certain effects, and ongoing scrutiny of these efforts through further outside analysis. And finally, specifically, he says there should be further language to ensure that the final text affects only federal law. Section 4A's use of the term Canadian law is different than the term laws of Canada used elsewhere in the bill. It is essential that the bill not include language that could be seen as impacting provincial law, or it will be susceptible to constitutional challenges. Again, with my preface of not being a expert legal mind, I'm hoping somebody that is more of a legal mind could maybe help us understand the concerns of somebody who I think is well spoken on this topic.
Thank you. I'll do my best. And I can't resist. I did clerk with Professor Newman way back when, so do know of his scholarly reputation and work. And of course, he has been flagging questions about Bill C-262 and this legislation along these lines for some time. We have done our best, I would say, through the engagement process and the updates and enhancements made to the bill to address some of the questions raised, notably by provinces and territories as well, in relation to the scope of application of this legislation. And ultimately, there is a very deliberate choice and use of words in different provisions in the bill. The one that was flagged with respect to application in Canadian law is intended to reflect, as I spoke to at the beginning of this session, the fact that the declaration can inform the interpretation of all laws in Canada, federal, provincial, constitutional, and so to be accurate, it would need to reflect that. That said, you'll see the obligation in Clause 5 that relates to alignment of laws. It uses the term laws of Canada, Government of Canada, and that speaks to what Minister Bennett was emphasizing and Deputy Minister Quan Watson, that this obligation to align laws applies to federal laws, those enacted by the Parliament of Canada. Thanks.
So, sorry, just real short, you don't believe there's any confusion then in that matter within the legislation that it might be misinterpreted to affect provincial law as well?
I think our response would be that we have sought to make that as clear as possible in the legislation, recognizing that there are always potentials for divergent interpretations, but the effort has been made to use those terms deliberately and to reflect it in both English and French as well. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I'm going to take a totally different angle here, so I'll back off the legal stuff. There's been a lot of talk with people at committee over the time we've been hearing from witnesses about the action plan and how the action plan, and even the minister, I believe, talked about it being the heavy lifting, and how that heavy lifting is going to be done in the action plan. But there's been a lot of talk about maybe doing that action plan prior to the introduction of the legislation rather than the legislation kind of invoking that action plan. Do you know anybody in either department, and I'll open this up to everybody, was there any discussion in any of the departments about working on the action plan in the time between Bill 262 and C15? Was there any thought ever given to doing some of that heavy lifting prior to introducing the new Bill C15?
Would like to.
I can take a first start on that one, and then perhaps Ross will have something to add. So I think, as was reflected in the response on what the government has done to align laws with the declaration, there has been a great deal of work done, both in anticipation of this legislation potentially coming forward, but more generally in relation to the government's commitment to implement the declaration in Canada. So there continues to be work in relation to laws that are coming to align them with the declaration, and there will be, of course, a further effort made to develop this action plan for the future, but again, reflecting and respecting the fact that the legislation requires it to be done in cooperation and consultation with Indigenous peoples. There's no plan sort of already set. It clearly needs to be done in a collaborative way. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that. That brings us to time. There are two matters that I need to bring forward, and so one of them we'll use the final Liberal portion to deal with an intervention by Mr. Batiste with regard to a request that he has to introduce or make a submission. Mr. Batiste, will you want to speak to that?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Recently, I received a letter from the Royal Society of Canada, and this is the senior colloquium of public intellectuals, academics, and scholars in support of C15. I believe their input is valuable and should be incorporated into the study of C15, and I would like to put forward a motion to do so. Earlier today, I sent out the English version of the letter to committee members for reference and provided a copy to the committee clerk. Unfortunately, the Royal Society of Canada did not provide a French language version. However, if adopted, it would be, of course, translated and made available in both official languages. Therefore, I move that in relation to its study of Bill C15, that the committee accepts the brief provided by the Royal Society of Canada.
On the motion, any debate or comment?
En fait, il s'agit simplement de dépôt, monsieur.
It's just about to their sending a brief. Is that it, Mr. Chair?
Submitting the brief, which is not translated at the moment.
D'accord, merci.
Thank you. Thanks.
Okay, so on division, are we in favor of allowing this the letter to be submitted to the committee? Are there any nays?
Monsieur le Président.
Chair, I do have a question with respect to the motion with respect to the business of the committee, because this document was only sent out in English, and I think that it is supposed to be in both official languages before a motion is tabled.
That's correct, Mr. Batiste, and I understand your situation, but I'm concerned about a precedent that is clearly stated in the bylaws of the committee. So, and of course, your letter is directed to the Minister of Justice, Mr. Lametti, Ms. Bennett, and so they would receive the material that we would not have within our witness testimony. So understanding that, are you still wishing to move the motion?
Yes.
All right. All in favor of accepting this submission from the Royal Society? Show of hands. 1, 2, 3. All opposed? I don't see any hands.
Monsieur le Président, en ce moment.
Chair, if I understand correctly, are we going to vote against a routine housekeeping motion that has already been passed by our own committee? Am I to understand this?
Hey, Mr. Chair.
I'm concerned about that myself, so I'll ask the clerk to intervene.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll make this intervention in English so that I can be as clear as possible. This motion does not go outside the routine motions regarding distribution of documents in both official languages. It has the effect of having the brief submitted past the deadline previously adopted by the committee. So it will still be translated before being distributed.
Thanks for that clarification. Further comment? I saw Mr. Anandasangri.
I believe that clarifies the situation, Mr.
Okay, thanks for that. That's a subtlety that's important, Madam Gill.
Pour ma part, Monsieur le Président.
Well, it's not very clear to me. I don't know if the clerk could repeat what he said. I could ask a yes or no question. As Mr. Is that a motion that was just been tabled by Mr. Baptiste, is it part of our routine motions? Yes. Well, I won't oppose it then.
Much. So I believe then, once again, seeing no objections, the motion is accepted and the document will be submitted in translation at the appropriate time after the deadline that we've submitted. So thank you. Next, we have the question from Mr. Schmale. And would you pose that again, Mr. Schmale, so that we can be clear?
Thank you, Chair, and I'll try to be quick. I know people have places to be. It is in regards to Minister Lametti's appearance today. Obviously, he wasn't here. We would like to, on this side anyway, hear from the minister, as he is the sponsor of the bill. He's the one that, as Mr. Vidal pointed out, invoked closure on the bill within the House of Commons during debate. So to meet Mr. Baptiste's concerns in regards to timelines, I could be wrong, but I don't think it'll take 2 hours to go clause by clause in the bill. It's not overly long, and I don't think there are a ton of concerns. So if possible, I'd like my motion to be that the chair and the clerk attempt to secure Minister Lametti's appearance at the next committee meeting at 11 o'clock. I don't know what date it is, the 22nd of April at 11 o'clock.
It's an important clarification because there is almost no possibility of setting another meeting for Wednesday. The next open slot is on Monday. So the question is, as you outlined it to committee, are we willing to spend a few minutes at the beginning of the Thursday meeting to hear from the minister? And I have a number of hands up. Mr. Anandasangri, Ms. Gazan, Mr. Vidal, Ms. Gill. Gary, go ahead, please.
I think Ms. Gazan was ahead of me.
Sorry.
Ms. Gazan and Mr. Vidal were ahead of me.
I'm sorry. Leah.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I would like to respect my colleague MP Smeal's proposal in principle and suggest that instead of maybe a personal appearance, that members of the committee are provided with an opportunity to submit the questions to the minister, which he is to respond to, or his office is to respond to before our next committee sitting.
Mr. Vidal?
Mr. Chair, I'm going to be a little bit facetious. In my long and distinguished career as a member of Parliament and a member of this committee for the whole 18 months that I've been here, I don't believe there's another example of having a witness appear and be able to give their submission without being questioned by the committee. I would be concerned the precedent that sets, and I mean the importance of this legislation, the importance of the minister appearing himself, I think is actually crucial to moving this forward. So I would obviously speak in support of my colleague Mr. Schmale's motion to ensure that Minister Lametti does appear before we move to clause by clause.
Madame Gill.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much. Very often I don't hear what you're saying because the translation is still going on. It's not finished yet. I just want to say that I support my colleague, Mr. Schmale's motion with respect to the appearance of the minister. But we don't want to unnecessarily extend our work, but it's very important that he appear.
Mr. Ananda Sangari.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and I definitely appreciate everyone's comments here. I do think that Ms. Gazan's suggestion is quite reasonable. What I would maybe propose is that maybe right now I think Minister Bennett has already read the statement that Mr. Lametti was supposed to present today. The opportunity for questions, given the makeup of this committee, 5 questions for the Conservatives, 5 for the Liberals, 4 for the Bloc, and 4 for the NDP, with a response deadline of 5 o'clock tomorrow, and then such information be presented and accepted as formal submissions to this committee. And I think it's fair to say that Mr. Lametti regrets not being here. He has been very engaged on this file. We've had a number of discussions over the past several weeks, and I know he regrets not being here. And I think it's important and it's imperative that the information that's provided by our witnesses today has been exhaustive, but if there is clarifications that need to go further, the suggestion that Ms. Gazan makes with minor modifications, I think would and should suffice in terms of ensuring that the minister's comments are on the record.
So, and by the way, I'll excuse our other witnesses. Thank you very much. I just wondered if perhaps there would be some reference to the staff. So if you folks are fine, then we'll allow you to depart the meeting. So what we have before us is a motion, and the discussion around the motion was a new suggestion. So the first thing we have to deal with, if it's our intention to go along with Ms. Gazan's proposal, is to deal with the motion itself. So all those opposed to the motion by Mr. Schmale, could you please raise your hand? And those in favor of the motion? I was always bad at math. Oh, there's another one. So how did we do, Mr. Clerk? I believe the motion is defeated.
Mr. Chair, if the motion is being voted on, then we either need to take a recorded vote on division, or have it adopted with consent. So in that there appears to be dissent, any member can request a recorded vote, or you can interpret the results based on the dissent that you see.
Well, I believe I saw that the motion was opposed, unless I hear from someone else with regard to a recorded vote. We'll stay with that. But on the understanding that we are interested.
J'aimerais un vote par appel nominal, Monsieur le Président.
I want a recorded division, Chair.
Right, on division. Recorded
A recorded division, a recorded vote.
The hands of the clerk now.
This is a recorded vote on the motion of Mr. Schmale. Mr. Anandasangari.
Opposed.
Mr. Vancouverden. Mr. Vancouverden.
Opposed.
Mr. Baptiste.
Opposed.
Miss Zan.
Opposed.
Mr. Pawlowski.
Against.
Miss Gazan.
Opposed.
Madame Gill.
En faveur.
Mr. Melillo.
In favor.
Mr. Viersen.
In favor.
Mr. Schmale.
I vote in favor.
Mr. Chair, that is.
Excuse me, Mr. Clerk, do I get to vote?
Excuse me, Mr. Vidal. My apologies, Mr. Vidal.
I would be in favor. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vidal. Mr. Chair, it's yeas 4, nays 6.
So the motion is defeated. And members of the committee, I'm expecting then that all of us would, those of who wish to hear from the Justice Minister would provide him with their questions. And Mr. Clerk, when would we require the answers to be given?
Up to the committee, but depending on the length of answers.
Monsieur le Président, j'aurais.
Mr. Chair, I have a question because I see people are leaving. But I have a question about the vote. I didn't want to interrupt you. You said there were 4 people who voted in favor, but there was Mr. Melillo, Brisson, Schmale, Vital, and myself. That's 5 people. I want to be sure the 5 votes were counted. Thank you.
Merci.
Thanks, Madame Gill. Yes, they were. So once again, Mr. Clerk, when would we require the responses from the minister?
With the assumption that the responses would be provided in both official languages by the minister or the department, the committee can set its own deadline as it sees fit.
Mr. Anandasangari.
So with that in mind, Mr. Chair, questions to be posed by 5 p.m. today with a response by 5 p.m. tomorrow from the minister. And in the meantime, the number of questions, I think I had suggested 5, 5, 4, and 4. So we just need agreement on that. But I think 24-hour turnaround time is sufficient given it will be in both official languages, the response.
Is there anyone opposed to the suggestion by Mr. Anandasangari? I am seeing no opposition, so that's what we will do. Does that require a formal motion, Mr. Clerk?
If everyone's in agreement, then the agreement will be minuted accordingly.
Okay. And Ms. Gill, are you okay? I see your hand. Everything?
Absolument. Ah, non, pas du tout.
No, I forgot. I completely agree. Fine.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you.
That, I believe, brings us to a motion to adjourn. Thank you, Ms. Gazan. I'll take that as a motion to adjourn. We'll see you all on Thursday.
Au revoir.